Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24 today. How many of you are in a similar situation as myself that says, you know what? I'm just over this whole coronavirus thing. Let's get it done with. All right, I'm tired of it. I was sick and tired of it on day 2, but we tried to do our best. And one of the things, though, that we were very dedicated in, which I'm proud of, is we weren't just going to sit around and be couch potatoes the whole entire time. So every single night we went out and we started walking, Beth and I, and I think we've only missed 2 days since March. We've gone out every single night, but we just been going around our neighborhood because you can't really walk anywhere else. You aren't supposed to walk anywhere else. All the parks are closed and all this. And so 3 weeks into it, whenever we were about ready to go for a walk, I was like, Beth, I can't do it. I know every single house. I know every single bush. I know every single dog. I know it all. I just got to get out of this neighborhood. So then we just drove to some other person's neighborhood and walked around there. But I was just, so tired of it because waiting isn't fun. And we're in a season really of waiting here as we're almost through it. Hopefully, Lord willing, we'll be through all this coronavirus stuff soon. But still, there's a few things that haven't opened up yet. There's a few things that you can't do. There's a few things that are just still kind of holding us up here, and it's not fun, right? Waiting isn't fun, and we've known this even since we were children, because even though June 20th, later on this week, is technically the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, every child know that that's a lie. The longest day of the year is December 24th, right? Because there's something that just, it seems like every minute takes 10 minutes to get through as you're waiting, as you're longing for something. As Christians, we have been waiting and longing for the return of Jesus Christ for 2,000 years, right? And even as we get closer and we get closer, it seems like every minute is 10 minutes, and we just are longing to see Jesus' face. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. As we get to Matthew chapter 24, this is arguably the most significant chapter of prophecy in all the Bible. It's at least in the top 5. It is very important, and I know that there's a lot of people. I've got more people say they're excited about when I preach Matthew 24 than any other passage here. And so we're going to walk through this now. It's going to take us several weeks, and Matthew 25 as well kind of buddies up alongside of that. And so it's probably going to take us really most of the summer to get through these 2 chapters. But they're so rich and they're so meaningful. But here's what I'm going to do with these passages, because whenever we talk about prophecy, sometimes people get, there's lots of different opinions, there's lots of different ideas, somebody comes out with some crazy ideas and things like that. What I'm going to do in these next 2 chapters is do the exact same thing that I've always done, which is we're going to read through it, we're going to try to figure out what it meant to his disciples, why did he tell them this, we're going to try to figure out those principles, and we're going to apply it to our life. Because whether we are blessed, the blessed generation that gets to see Jesus Christ, or some of us will not be able to see that in person, this chapter and these verses are important for us, and they teach us something regardless. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into Matthew 24, verse 1. It says, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. All right, now, just to remind you what we've been talking about the last several weeks, right, is that Jesus was in the temple, and he was conversing with the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the religious leaders, right? They kept trying to ask him trick questions, and then he would come back and say, he would just make them look foolish. And so there's a whole chapter of that, Matthew 22. And then Matthew 23, he started this big sermon, this big speech about how they were condemned, the religious leaders were condemned. All of this was inside the temple, inside their ground. This was their turf. And Jesus came in and he preached the biggest statement of condemnation over the religious leaders in the most holy place. And then at that point, he did the smart thing and started to walk out of the temple. Now, whenever he's walking out of the temple, though, the disciples come to him and start pointing out the buildings of the temple. right? And so as they're walking out, they're saying, wow, Jesus, would you look at those columns? Would you look at those arches? And some of that it makes complete sense, right? Because most of his disciples were small town boys from a fisherman town on the north side of Galilee. And so there was just, they had not seen anything impactful, not seen anything grand at all, but yet they're seeing this for the first time. The temple was such a magnificent structure. They said that it was arguably the most important structure in all of the ancient world. For instance, get this. It took 15,000 men 80 years to build this temple. 80 years to build the temple. That's pretty magnificent. They said that it is actually probably more grand than anything in Rome, more grand than anything in Ephesus or any of the major cities back then, but we don't realize it just because of anti-Semitism. We don't recognize it as one of the ancient wonders, but it was grand. And so they would be walking around. I mean, what's the biggest, most grand building you have ever seen? I've seen the Capitol building, and that's magnificent whenever you walk into it. I've seen, even though it's not as big, but like going over to Europe and seeing some of those cathedrals, when you walk in, if you've ever been in a large cathedral and you're like, I know God is bigger, but this seems like a pretty good effort to be the house of God. Like when there's everything, it's like there's problems, there's weird statues and all that, but it's like this is something magnificent. Or maybe it's even just like if you've ever been to Chicago, where now the Sears Tower is, I think that's still the largest building in America, and you like look up and it's 110 stories high, and it's as tall as you can possibly imagine, and it's just magnificent. And you're like, man, this isn't crazy. And so that's what the disciples were doing. They're saying, this is amazing. Have you seen the detail? Have you seen the architecture? But don't miss the irony that they were saying this to Jesus. And Jesus is like, yeah, this is cool, but have you seen the mountains? Have you seen the ocean? Have you seen the stars? Because that's my handiwork right now. And so the irony is that they were pointing out, it was almost like a little toddler coming up to a builder and saying, hey, look at my Lego house. And the builder saying, yeah, but you're in the house that I built. And that's what was happening here. And so Jesus comes back and he answers them. But this first brings us to the first point. It's that don't be distracted by good things. What to do while we're waiting on Jesus, waiting on the Lord to return. Don't be distracted by good things. The temple was a good thing. It was there for hundreds of years in order to honor God and to help people worship the Lord. But yet they started to get distracted by the very thing that was pointing to the man that was right beside him. They should have been focused on Jesus. And so verse 2 now is Jesus' answer. But he answered them, you see all these things. Do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So he comes back and says, listen, don't be impressed by this. This building is going to collapse. Right? In the same way, just as true today, this building in Community Bible Church, this building one day will fall apart. This building will be long forgotten. The church is right here, right? And Jesus is saying, hey, don't be impressed by the temple. Don't be impressed by the structure. When I'm standing right here, the temple's going to go away. The temple's going to be completely collapsed. And so, but he says something that it's going to be, no stone is going to be left on top of each other, which ended up being an accusation that whenever they put him on trial in Matthew 26, they end up and say, hey, we heard that he said he was going to destroy the temple, right? Which it was a false accusation. It was taken out of context. It would be a little worrisome, though, if we went into Sears Tower, 110-story tall tower, and said, this won't be here for long. Like, we would be like, security, right? And it made people nervous as well whenever Jesus was making these type of statements, but they didn't understand yet that he wasn't talking that he was going to do it, but that temple was going to be destroyed soon, which brings us to the big idea of the first point, is that nothing is as good as Jesus, so focus on him. Nothing is as good as Jesus, so focus on him. See, because they were focused on good things, and we often get focused on good things as well, right? We often get focused on our ministry here at the church, and we get so busy that we never actually take time to pray. We get focused on our family so much that we spend so much time pointed over into them that we never actually stop and look at the one who gave us that family. We get so focused on the work, but we don't realize that God was the one that gave us that job, and he can take it away. And so don't get focused on good things. Focus on Jesus. Let's keep reading here. In verse 3, it says, As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So they come and they ask him a question on the Mount of Olives. And so this starts the Olivet Discourse. Now, I said that last week, Olivet Discourse, and somebody's like, Frisbee golf, right? No, it's not disc golf or discourse or anything like that, but rather it is the teaching of Jesus. And it was over 2 chapters long. It's the last final teaching of Jesus here. And it's so significant. He starts to say, okay, here's the answer to this question. But they ask him, when will these things be, at the start of verse 3 here, which means when will the temple be destroyed? And then they say, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? See, in their mind, they thought that the temple was going to be destroyed at the same time that Jesus Christ was going to come back. But we know when the temple was destroyed. It was in AD 70, all right? That will be on your quiz, so you better mark it down. Just kidding. But it was in AD 70 whenever the Romans came in and they completely destroyed the temple. The historian Josephus said that you could not even tell. If you walked through Jerusalem, you couldn't even tell that a city had been there. You wouldn't be able to tell where the temple was if you did not already know. It was completely demolished. Its magnificent building was utterly destroyed. And 30 years later. And so they come to him, they say, when will that be destroyed? And when will you come back? And they're asking the same questions that we want to ask, right? When will Jesus Christ come back? How long is it going to be? How long do we have to wait? But they saw it all as one occurrence. And I can't blame them, because in the Old Testament, that's kind of how it's presented. Whenever you read the Old Testament, and even I think it's Isaiah 61 is a passage that Jesus often quoted. But basically, you can read through Isaiah 61, and part of it's about his first coming, and then in the middle of the verse, it switches to his second coming, and there's no distinction there, because it all looks like, okay, the Messiah is coming. They could not quite understand what that looked like. And so as an example here, I won't be able to do it fully, but if I'm able to line these 2 ping pong balls up perfectly in your vision, right? You would be able to say, yeah, there's a ping pong ball there. And you'd be able to say, like, yeah, there's something behind it, right? But you can't really fully distinguish it. The reason why we can distinguish it is because we're right here. We're in the middle of it, and we can look back and we can look forward. For the prophets, for all the people, the Jewish people, they just saw in this angle that say, yeah, the Messiah is coming. It's hard to distinguish between the first and second coming. It's almost like if you have ever been to Colorado or something like that, where it's you see the mountain range and there's these big, beautiful mountains and they look like they're almost on top of each other, and then you actually drive and it's like, no, there's miles and miles apart from them. And that's what they did not yet understand, was that Jesus Christ's first coming and his second coming was different. Because when they were asking, like, how long is it going to be, the indication is there, like, is it going to be Tuesday? Like, I don't know if Tuesday works, but is it going to be next week? Or it's certainly not going to be a month from now. Like, I want to get this over with. They had no idea that it would take this time. And so Jesus starts to set up this expectation that no, his second coming will take some time here. And so in verse, let's see, where did I leave off? 4, thank you. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray." See that no one leads you astray. Which brings us to our second point in the bulletin, is to don't be led astray by bad people. Don't be led astray by bad people. So while we're waiting on God, it's going to be very easy, all the more so as the time approaches, to be led astray by bad people. And that was his very first warning. Don't let them lead you astray. Verse 5, "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray." All right, now, we read that and we kind of think of, like, okay, those are those weirdos, living in compounds, and they're coming, there's a guy that says he's Jesus, and then eventually this all ends with drinking some Kool-Aid, and like, okay, that's what it's talking about, right? But he doesn't actually say in Jesus' name, does he? He says they'll come and they'll say, I am the Christ, and the Christ is a title. It means the anointed one. It means the Messiah. It means that somebody's coming on behalf of the Lord. And so, yeah, there's not too many people. If I come up here and I say that I'm Jesus all of a sudden, most of you, hopefully all of you, would immediately leave. And that's usually what happens in most cases. But there's a lot of people that have come and said, oh, I speak for God. I'm his anointed one. I am the last prophet, as Muhammad would say, or Joseph Smith in Mormonism. They both say they saw an angel of light and were given revelation from God, not realizing that an angel of light was actually Satan, is what it's described as. And but there's many people that come and say, no, I'm speaking on behalf of the Lord, and they are able to lead many astray. And so the very first thing Jesus said was like, hey, there's going to be a lot of people that will come, and they're going to try to lead you astray, but don't fall for it. In verse 5 now, verse 6, it says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. Now, I think that if you have watched the news at all, you know that there are wars and rumors of wars. I was reading through some of the statistics that over the last decade, there's an average of 4 different military conflicts that average over 10,000 deaths a year. 4 different ones. Obviously, the Syrian conflict has killed more people in the last decade, averaging close to 40,000 people a year have died in Syria. There's over 60 current conflicts going on in the world. And in the last century, in the 20th century, the century that was supposed to be such a ushering in of the modern world, over 120 people died in wars between 1900 and 2000. So we say, yeah, this is kind of making sense, right? It's almost like Jesus knew what he was talking about. But here's the deal. You say, but that's always been the case, right? There's always been wars, and there's always been rumors of wars, and there's always been this. And so we say, yeah, there's going to be more, and it has gotten more, but is that really the sign? Well, yes and no. Because look what he says. He says, don't panic, right? In verse 6, see that you are not alarmed. Don't panic. Don't be fear-stricken, because this must take place, but this is not yet the end. Meaning that when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't think that immediately is a sign that Jesus Christ is going to come back again, but rather that has to happen. That has to happen to set things up. And so every time there's a war and the countries are in conflict, every time a new leader gets raised up or a new leader falls down, literally everything from the time of 80, 70, all the way up until 2020 and beyond, everything is leading up to this. God is just moving pieces around, and it's going to get more and more and more and more. Now, here's the important question, though, is what is he actually talking about when he says the end is going to come? What is he talking about that says, that I'm coming back again? Oftentimes, we think of this as the rapture. We think of it like, okay, once we start hearing of enough wars and rumors of war, then all of a sudden Jesus Christ is going to come and take us back. That's not what he's talking about in the rest of this chapter. I don't believe it is. Rather, he's talking about a second coming, which comes at the end of the tribulation. So let me just lay it out. It's going to get complicated for just one moment if you're not familiar with it, but then we'll come right back to it. But we believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross, and he rose again, and then he ascended back into heaven. And then now there's been 2,000 years of things getting ready. Eventually, one day, he will just call his church back home and call what's called the rapture. His coming, his second coming, though, isn't for another 7 years later. He judges the earth for 7 years, and then he comes back. And this is what it's primarily talking about. Not the rapture, but after the tribulational time. And so things are going to keep getting ramped up and keep getting ramped up until it finally reaches a fever pitch in the tribulational time. Let's keep going on here. It says, verse 7, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. Stop right there. I read even more about just how many famines there are in Africa right now. They said that it's the worst famine that has ever happened in Africa is ongoing right now, and we don't even hear about it, right? I thought it was interesting and a little bit sad, and I'm part of the problem. But it said that there's 835 million people that are hungry in the world. And the U.S. currently is spending $120 billion on obesity and obesity-related sicknesses. Just to give you an indication of how blessed we are, but that blessing can turn into a cursing, that there's almost 1 billion people going hungry, and we're spending $1 billion on trying to lose that weight, and I'm right there. But that's happening all over. And earthquakes in various places. The most earthquakes have happened in the last decade than that it has been for the last 60 or 70 years. It seems like it's ramping up. But look at and that brings us to the big idea again. It says, the crazier the world gets, the easier it is to fall away. The crazier the world gets, the easier it is to fall away. There's going to be so many opportunities to be scared, so many opportunities to fall away as in chase after people that are not pronouncing the correct gospel. There's so many opportunities there. But look at verse 8. I think it really helps explain everything. In verse 8, it says, all these are but the beginning of birth pains. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. All right, so for those of you that have given birth, that's not me. All right, just so we're clear here. All right, so I only know on second-hand accounts, first-hand sight, but very thankfully not first-hand experience. But birth pains. If you think about it, for now in the year 2020, it starts out. You almost know instantly now. They have all the tests that give you 99.9% accuracy or whatever, so you can almost know instantly. And then you're immediately going to try to get into the doctor's office and get that ultrasound. So you can see that little thing that looks like a jelly bean, and you're like, that's my baby, it looks like me. But you get so excited, and you're so excited for this new little life that's coming in, and it starts to develop, and immediately they tell you, they're like, it's crazy. They're like, yeah, that's like 2 centimeters long, and so that would put you at June 15th birth date. And you're like, that's 8 months away, and if you tell me if he was a millimeter longer, that would be a month long. It's amazing what they're able to do now, but we're able to tell you, almost, exactly, okay, here's what your birth date should be, and then that's never actually right? But it's so accurate, and at least you kind of know. You at least know that, it's within a few weeks, hopefully, you kind of know when that 9-month mark is coming. And you start to know that. But you think back 2,000 years ago, they didn't quite have that much knowledge, right? A woman would know. She could probably figure things out about the right time, but really you didn't quite know exactly when that birth date was. And so all the guessing that we do in 2020 was 10 times more. And so what would happen is that a woman would start to show and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden she would just start to experience birth pains, those contractions, right? Micah, my middle son, the 2-year-old, his little birth was a lot different. I think one, because he was like 9-something huge pounds. But Beth had started to have contractions 1 week before the baby was actually born. And it wasn't like just a fake, she felt it. But we'd go there and it was like, well, it's not quite ready, your body's not ready. And they'd send us home and we'd go and we'd call the doctor. But for 1 week, she kept having these birth pains, these contractions for a whole week leading up into it. And so she's a hero. I don't think she's in the room, but she's my hero. But that's what it was. And so Jesus Christ uses that illustration, the illustration of a pregnant woman, to give indication about his second coming. He's like, yeah, it's going to start, and you're going to start seeing a little baby bump, and it's going to get a little bit bigger, and it's going to get a little bit bigger, and it's going to get a little bit bigger until it finally reaches that fever pitch. And when it finally reaches the fever pitch, that's the tribulational time where it becomes so much pressure is put on things that the baby is about to come. And this illustration is Jesus is about to come back. And so that's a beautiful illustration that he gave us. But in verse 9, we're going to start to finish off this last paragraph, and then we'll be done. In verse 9, it says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. So they will deliver us up to tribulation. The you there, I believe, is talking about believers. The people from the church, from the start of it, through now, that it's going to continue to happen more and more and more and more until it reaches that fever pitch in the tribulational time. Now you say, but I thought you said the rapture was going to happen. Yeah, we will be gone if you're a believer, but there's still going to be many, many people saved in the tribulation. It's actually going to be the greatest time of revival the world has ever seen as well. But he's saying during that time, there's going to be such a tribulation, such a pressure put on them. And we're going to see that more and more and more as we get closer and closer and closer. In verse 10, once again, many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. In verse 11, and many false prophets will rise and lead many astray. 12, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like lawlessness has increased recently, right? I don't have to give you statistics about that one, but that is happening here in our nation, and sometimes we get a little bit too narrow and just look at things that are happening in America, but that's happening all over this world, that lawlessness is the idea that you know what is right, there is laws in place, but you ignore it, and that's what's happening. But look at this. It says, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. When you fall away from Jesus, you start to live lawlessly, and you start to let the love that's in your heart grow cold to one another. You will betray each other, and you will forsake each other. Which brings us to the last point in your bulletin there, is to learn to lovingly endure. What to do while we're waiting on Christ is to learn to lovingly endure. And you know, these points are about the second coming. They're about looking forward to Jesus Christ. But some of us, we're concerned about that, but we're also concerned about when Jesus Christ is going to be able to provide a job for us. Some of us we're concerned and we want to know all that, but we're also wondering, God, I'm kind of still waiting on you to show up and save my marriage. Some of us are here and we're saying, but I'm really waiting for my kids to finally get back in with you. And notice that these principles about us waiting for Jesus Christ's return, about not being distracted by good things, not being led astray by bad things, but to learn to lovingly endure, all of those principles are principles that are true no matter how we are waiting for the Lord today. And so if you're here and you're saying, yeah, I want the Lord to come, but in the meantime, it'd be really nice if I could actually put food on my table because I'm so lost and I'm broke and this COVID thing has been such a hardship for me. There's doctors, there's everything, and I just want to know if the same principles are still true. Focus on Jesus. Don't be led astray. Learn to lovingly endure. Let's finish off these last few verses and then we'll be done here. Verse 13, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now, this verse 14 is often quoted by missionaries and many other people that want to see the gospel proclaimed throughout the world, and that should be our foremost passion to continue to push the gospel forward. But in the meantime, this verse I don't think is actually talking about that. I think it's actually referencing Revelations 14:6. In Revelations 14:6, it says, during the tribulational time, an angel will go forth and preach the gospel to every tribe and every nation. And so once again, we're going to see a great revival that ultimately, Jesus Christ will win, and he will have victory for us today. And so as we continue on here, that last idea, big idea, is that the most loving thing we can do is to share the gospel. And that's the idea that I want to leave you with, though, is don't miss this fact that we're starting to talk about all these hardships, right? Famines, rumors of war, and we start to look forward and we say, that doesn't seem very good for any of us, right? That doesn't seem, you mean that these things are just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse until finally it's so bad that Jesus Christ then pulls us out, and we start to say, is that really the plan? But number one, don't forget that we win. It says that the gospel is going to go forth, that the gospel will be preached in every tribe and every nation, and everybody is going to get the chance to hear, and ultimately, spoiler alert, is that we win, that God wins. I wanted to finish off with one extra story, though. I told you about Micah. He's my little 2-year-old son. And that 2-year-old son, I told you that he had a delivery for like a week long. He had contractions. That was like the least significant part of Micah's birth story. Micah was born in September of 2018. Now, if you have a good memory, you know that Hurricane Irma also came in September of 2018. Some of you might have heard some of this story before, but it was a very stressful moment because I know you guys are all, Floridians and you've been through it all and you're like, oh, I wasn't scared. Listen, we were in St. Petersburg, okay, which means that we were about 3 inches off of sea level. And if a hurricane like Irma or Katrina, which is what we were expecting, hit St. Petersburg, then it would be gone, all right? And it made it a little bit more nerve-wracking whenever we were having a baby the same week as Irma was supposed to hit. I should have been that week building a crib for my son, but I was instead trying to scrounge up wood to put over my windows, right? And that was scary. I should have been trying to pack a bag for the hospital to have an overnight bag, but instead I was packing up things in case we had to go and have a baby in a shelter by ourselves, because that's what we did. I was more scared about getting on Interstate 75 and being stuck, an hour north of Ocala without any help, all by myself in the car. And so I was like, we're going to shelter in place. I don't know if this is the right decision, but we'll go to a shelter and we'll just do our best. And so we brought a tent. We brought all this stuff to have a baby with, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. This is scary. It was so scary because I had never felt more helpless in my entire life. Because I was so excited about the birth of my son. I was longing for him. I was anxious for him. I wanted to see him, but at the same time, a hurricane was coming towards me. And I felt helpless, and I felt scared, and I did not know what to do, and people were going crazy, and there wasn't any gas in the gas stations, there wasn't any supplies at Lowe's, there wasn't even water in the gas stations, much less gas. And I was scared. And so we prayed, and I had people all across the nation praying for us, just hold that baby in there. Apparently we prayed too good, because then it took a week long for her to actually have that little baby. But I remember that night after we got home from the shelter, we got home later that afternoon, the hurricane passed through, and we got home, and whenever we got there, of course, all the power was out in St. Petersburg, and it was hot, it was sticky. I never felt humidity quite like hurricane humidity post-hurricane, and it was just sticky and hot. We pulled the boards off. We had a little bit of damage on the roof, not too bad. Our neighbors helped us and got things off, and then we finally just collapsed in bed, and I just remember my wife, she was 9 months pregnant, and she was just exhausted. And she started crying. She's like, if I went into labor right now, I don't think I got it in me I just don't have anything left. And we just sat down and we cried and we prayed together. I went into the other room. We didn't have any power, and so I just grabbed my guitar and I was strumming around on my guitar. And 2 minutes later, the lights turned on. We were the very first people in all St. Petersburg to get lights back on. And we start singing and praising the Lord. But the point of this story is all of this, is that as we look forward into the future, it kind of looks like a hurricane is coming our way, doesn't it? It looks more uncertain now than any other time in my lifetime, and I'm guessing in any of your lifetime, because as we look forward into the future, it looks like a hurricane is coming in and everybody's going crazy and we don't have any answers. But just like my son still came a week later. My son was still there. And that is a happy story for me, that each and every one of us, as we look forward into the future and we see all this craziness happen, we can say, but Jesus is still coming, and we can still be excited, and we can still look forward into that day. Because even in the midst of the hurricane, the one that we waited for is coming. Father, we love you. We thank you, Lord, that no matter what this world might bring to us, that you are more than that. Lord, I pray that if we are scared or we are anxious, Lord, if we are waiting, and some of us are waiting so longingly for our whole lives for you to come, and we hope and pray that we get to see you face to face. Some of us are just even more worried about this upcoming mortgage payment, though. Whatever it is, I pray that we learn to wait on you and trust in you and know that you're coming and you're going to come through at the perfect time. Lord, I pray that if there's anybody here that's not a believer, that they would settle that they would know that tomorrow is not guaranteed, tomorrow is not promised, and that they need to settle that and put their faith and trust in you today. Lord, I pray for the believers as we anxiously await for your coming, that we look forward to seeing your face. Lord, let us worship you now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please stand and sing. We're going to sing that new song, Waymaker, one more time.